So let's continue with our program. We have now a conversation between Elmo and João. They're going to talk about the Spiritist Conscience. Let's see what they have to tell us today.
Hi. We are going to read a passage from Brother X, and then we are going to talk a little bit about it, me and Elmo. It's called the Spiritist Conscience, and I shared with you, and now I'm going to read it. You declare that you do not understand the purpose of so much self-criticism found in the messages given by discarnate spirits. X, who had an excellent service report on Earth, states in a communication that he did not act as well as he should have while living here. Z, known by possessing great virtues, communicates through several mediums, affirming that he abhors the precious time that he has wasted. And you, in turn, after taking in these great, interesting statements, declare, the impression that we have is that our fellow spiritists, speaking from the great beyond, are tormented by terrible guilt. How to explain this occurrence? My dear fellows, believe me when I say that I personally have a heartfelt admiration for spiritists, tireless builders of progress, and true workers for the revival of Christianity. They received so much freedom to interpret the teachings of Jesus that, in all fairness, I am not aware in this world of any faithful individuals that can face the problems of life and the universe with more reason. Repositories of extensive knowledge, it is fair that spiritists stay focused on accomplishing always more and better on behalf of so many brothers and sisters on earth who are still held back by illusions and misperceptions regarding their beliefs. It is said that Allan Kardec, while gathering the texts from which the Spirit's book would originate, on a certain night went to bed greatly impressed by an account of a dream Martin Luther once had. The great reformer, in his days, held the conviction of having been in paradise, garnering information regarding celestial bliss. Greatly moved, Kardec, the codifier of Spiritism, fell asleep and also saw himself out of his body in a singular out-of-body experience. There, next to him, he identified an envoy of the sublime plains who carried him unexpectedly to a foggy region where thousands of beings groan in horrible suffering. Sobs of affliction could be heard, mixed with shouts of wrath and blasphemies, followed by shrieks of crazy laughter. Amazed and recalling the tyrants of history, Kardec inquired, "Are these the ones who crucified Jesus?" "No, not one of them," replied the solicitous guide. Although responsible for their actions, those were in essence unaware of the extent of the evil they were committing. The Master himself helped them to get rid of their remorse, extending to them blessed reincarnations in which they paid for their transgressions of the law. Are they then Roman emperors? For they must certainly suffer in this place the very same pain they inflicted upon humankind. No, nothing of the sort. Men like Tiberius or Caligula did not possess the slightest notion of spirituality. Some of them, after several regenerative periods on earth, have already risen to more advanced planes, while others are still interned in the physical realm, at the brink of redemption. By any chance, are they imprisoned in these gloomy gorges, those who tortured the Christians in the early centuries of the Gospel? Asked the visitor. Indeed not, answered the lucid companion. The torturers of the followers of Jesus in the apostolic days were men and women who were almost savages, in spite of the outer coatings of civilization they displayed. They have been all guided towards reincarnation to acquire instruction and understanding. The codifier of Spiritism thought of the conquerors of ancient times, such as Attila, Alaric, Hannibal, and Genghis Khan. However, before being able to utter a new question, the envoy, following Kardec's thought, replied, "The warriors, you remember, are not wandering around here. They knew nothing about the realities of the spirit, and for that reason, received pious assistance. They were directed to new incarnations to atone for their transgressions according to the faults they had committed." "Then tell me," pleaded Kardec, extremely moved, "who are these sufferers whose howls and curses are crushing my soul?" Unperturbed, the guide clarified, "We have here with us those who were on earth fully educated and aware of the meaning of goodness and truth, but who deliberately turned away from them, especially the unfaithful Christians of all ages, perfectly aware of the teachings and examples of Christ, but who nonetheless gave in to evil on their own free will. For them, a new beginning on earth is always more difficult." Shocked by the unexpected response, Kardec returned to his body, and immediately thereafter got out of bed and wrote down the question he would present the following night to the mentors of the work in progress, and which would turn out to be question number 642 of the Spirit's book. Is it enough to simply not do what is evil in order to please God and to ensure our future happiness? No. We must do good to the best of our abilities. Each of you will have to answer for all the evil that has resulted from the good that you have failed to do. As it's easy to understand, my dear friends, it seems natural that the Spiritist conscience, based on such clear and logical principles, turns out to be quite different when compared to the prevailing ideas in most religions. Brother X, from the book Cartas and Crônicas, Letter and Chronicles by Brother X, Humberto de Campos. Now Elmo is going to talk a little bit about this passage.
Okay. I want to say a little bit first about Humberto de Campos, because I think this very little piece of his biography is related to this message itself. Okay. So Humberto Campos was born 1886, northeast of Brazil, state of Maranhão. Became orphan of father at a very early age, 6 years old or so. But a smart guy, was able to put himself to work through working. He started work at age 11, I believe, was able to put himself to school, moved to Rio, graduated in literature, become a journalist, and become a writer. Didn't do so well as writing romances, and he switched to journalism, writing chronics, and become very prolific and very famous and very important journalist in Brazil, writing chronics, doing some investigative report for very important newspapers in Brazil at that time, and primarily in Rio de Janeiro. Got sick rather young, and it said in his biography that his chronics prior to his illness, it was a little bit harsh, a lot of sarcasms, a lot of criticism, perhaps unnecessary criticism, but it's still famous because everything was very well written. And once he became sick, he switched a little bit, and his chronics become more compassionate, less sarcastic, less attacking figures of the Brazilians of the time, or personals of Brazil of the time. It becomes kind of more mellow of a chronist. He is an immortal Brazilian, being that he belongs to the Brazilian Academy of Literature. Died quite young at age 48. And during his incarnate life, he wasn't really much of a religious person. You know, Brazil being at that time officially a Catholic country, he had know a little bit of religion, what the Catholicism have presented to him, did not enjoy that very much, specifically because, as I'm going to mention the list, the lack of freedom of interpretation. And naturally was shocked when he ended up in the spiritual world. But it is said, and that is reported by Francisco Xavier himself, that only 3 months after his death, he met Francisco Xavier when Chico Xavier, in out of the body at night, went to the spiritual world as he used to do quite frequently. And he describes that he was there in the spiritual world, and there was a multitude of spirits. And among that multitude of spirits, Humberto Campos took the front and presented himself to him. You know, I am here, Humberto de Campos, and they have the conversation. And soon after that, he starts to present to the spiritual center and give sporadic messages from the spiritual world. It wasn't until 1937 that he came out with the very first book. And after that, followed by at least 11 others. I did 3 different things, and one gave him 15 books, another gave him 12 books. But only 3 years after his discarnation, he was able to present his first book. In 1944, his family, Humberto Campos, decided to take the FAB and Francisco Xavier to court, demanding copyrights of the publications. The statement, if it's really Humberto de Campos, we, the family, have the right to get something out of those publications. That was one of the biggest, perhaps the biggest judicial event dealing with psychography, and was decided at that time. Fabi prevailed in the case, and was decided that the disease does not have a right to copyright, basically. This case was very long, was very difficult, especially for Francisco Xavier, who felt attacked from both sides, from those who attacked him as a medium, and those who knew him as a medium. His friend was co-workers basically with him that did not understood that he was not there to fight anything, that it was part of his life to be attacked by others and demanding Chico Xavier to defend himself, and Chico never did. So it was a difficult period for him also. After that, Humberto Campos took a little break from psychographies with Chico Xavier, and when he returned with a pseudonym, Irmão X, and for those who believe in translating names, would be Brother X. And then the reason that I give this little biography of him is because I relate to this passage a lot with himself, Humberto de Campos. To talk a little bit more about him as a chronist in the spiritual world, all his books are exactly the continuation of his life as a reporter, as a journalist. And he says that, he declares that the journalist in him is so impregnated into him, he cannot help himself. When he sees an opportunity to interview a figure or to do some kind of report, he jumps at it right away. It's almost uncontrollable, this desire to do investigative work, to do interviews. And he continued doing that in the spiritual world. He interviewed a whole lot of people. He had the opportunity to interview Peter Simon, Judas, Tiradentes, Marilyn Monroe, Socrates, and the name goes on, individuals that he interviewed, as well doing a lot of investigative work. One may ask, how did he was able to get all those, let's say in Boa Nova, all the good news, in which he basically is as if he was over there with the disciples and Jesus Christ, following them as a reporter, collecting the daily activities of Jesus and the reporter. Boa Nova is such a fantastic book for that reason. It's really puts you there with Jesus. And as if he was a reporter in our days with a camera and recording everything and big it was. It said that he had access to archives, the same way that you could go to a library today and do biographies and say the work of and check the life of figures, I don't know, what Michael Jackson or Bonaparte. There is archives in the spiritual world also of those times, and he, as an investigative journalist, went to look for those informations and gave us the wonderful gift of putting those out for us via the psychography of Francisco Xavier. And in this message over here, the first things that jump in front of my eyes is when he says that they, as we, Spiritism, receive so much freedom to interpret the teachings of Jesus. I think this is imperative. Having this liberty to not be limited by dogmas that limits our ability to expand our interpretation of the teachings of Christ is such a wonderful gift that you really have to honor, respect, and enjoy it. You are able to explore, to find our own interpretation, to reach our own conclusions, of course, with basis on those who know more than us. I cannot pick up something and start doing on my own. I have to rely on information from other peoples, and in the information from other peoples, like what is presented to us in the Spirit's book. What else would you want? The collection of enlightened spirits who put together answers of extremely important questions for our life. And it's therefore, and from that point on, then we can use our freedom of interpretation, utilizing the greatest two gifts that we have, our intelligence and our free will. And I think Spiritism, at least in the Western world, is the only collection of informations in terms of moral teachings that gives you that freedom of interpretation. To me, this is absolutely essential. And then here it presents a contrast over here in the last two paragraphs. Martin Luther, not Martin Luther King, make sure that you understand that, but the Martin Luther of the Reformation. He goes to paradise and brings visions of heaven, so to say. And when Kardec had an opportunity to go out of the body, they take him to see suffering people. It's a huge contrast and a very meaningful contrast here, in which the benefactors who brought Kardec to visit the spiritual world wants to give them valuable lessons applicable for our life here. To talk about things of heaven, it is so beyond us that it's perhaps was okay for Martin Luther, but not for us, the dollar bills like myself, right? For us, is it important that we see the reality of our existence and the consequences of our actions, and more important here, that's to me this thematic of this lesson, of our inaction. This is the greatest thing over here. And basically the message tells us a repetition of Christ, when Christ tells us, you have heard what have been told to you. Do not do to others what you do not like others to do to you. But in truth I tell you, do to others what you'd like people to do to you. With completely transformed in new paradigms into inaction to action. It's okay not to do harm, but it's imperative that you do good, that you act, that you be proactive in goodness. And that's why the flag of Spiritism is without charity, there is no salvation, because charity is action. It's love in action. To me, this is the greatest message in this book in Spiritism. You know, we can go back to the parable of the talents. You know, one receives 10, one receives 5, one receives 1. Spiritism is 100. Spiritism is giving us 100 talents over here. We're going to bury it. What you're gonna do with it? And that's my message on this. Thank you, João.
Thanks, Elmo. I think you covered it all. You know, I just want to remind everyone, remind ourselves one thing that we always say at our classes, that Spiritism brings to us. The more you know, the more responsible you are. And this passage shows exactly that. Those that knew very little went back to the spiritual world and were treated and rescued and taken to places that they can start their regeneration process. We that know more, and those, especially as the guide said here, the unfaithful Christians of all ages, perfectly aware of the teachings and examples of Christ, but who nonetheless gave into evil on their own free will. That's the message for all of us. What are we doing with all this knowledge that we received? Are we using it to help our brothers and sisters in need, to help humanity progress? Again, we are imperfect spirits, we have our limitations, we have our shortcomings. We are not expected to be perfect. The message that Zoraida, Paco, and Philip discussed in the beginning, the perfect Spiritist center. You know, Chico Xavier said that if he had waited to be perfect to start the work, he would have never started the work. We need to start doing our part yesterday. If we haven't done yet, today. We are in this journey, all of us here together, different places, different journeys, but we all have the knowledge and the responsibility of disseminating these wonderful teachings that we have received from the superior spirits, that we have received from Brother X, from Emmanuel, from André Luiz, and above all, from Allan Kardec, our codifier, and today, especially from Dr. Bezerra de Menezes also, who was the guide for the early Spiritism in Brazil, the president of the Brazilian Spiritist Federation. So, my message to all of you here this today, as we celebrate the 20th anniversary of STNY, is to continue working, to never stop working, because it is only through work that we are going to achieve a better place for ourselves on our journey back to the spiritual world. We don't want to be the ones who find ourselves amongst those suffering, not because they haven't done any evil, but because of the good that we have failed to do. So thank you all for your attention, and back to you, Lilian.